All right, hey ladies. So we ended class just talking about the ways that changes in demand affect the demand curve. So changes in demand shift the entire demand curve to the left or to the right, and there are 5 different ways that there are changes in demand. The first one is changes in population. When a population increases, opportunities to buy and sell increase. The demand for most products increases. The example I gave you guys was the school's brownies, right? If the Mercy population doubled, so say their school went from 400 to 800, then they would have demand for the amazing, delicious brownies would also go up, and so they would increase the production of brownies to meet that demand. Vice versa, when a population decreases, opportunities to buy and sell also decrease, and demand for most products decreases. So if the Mercy population was cut in half, then the demand would also be cut in half because there would be half the people demanding brownies. Okay, so you can see if the population increases, look at the chart on the right. If the population increases, it would move to the right. If the population decreased, it would move to the left. Okay, another one is changes in income. People can't buy goods if they can't afford them. Remember the gas example I gave you guys, the gas for your car? The demand for most goods depends on income. As income increases or decreases, demand also decreases. So you're not going to keep buying super fancy makeup if your college budget doesn't afford you can't afford super fancy Chanel makeup instead of just buying the drugstore L'Oreal or Maybelline. Right? So your change in income. There's also changes in tastes and preferences. When a product becomes a fad, more of the products are demanded and sold at every possible price. The demand curve then shifts to the right. So I don't know about you guys, but Beanie Babies were really popular when I was growing up. So that's a great example. Beanie Babies were so popular for a while that the price went up because demand was so high that the price went up and people would buy them at no matter what the cost of them. But then all of a sudden, they kind of fell out of fashion and the price then went down as well. Another example would be those flowy pants that are really in. They're kind of a fad that's in right now, or Ugg boots. Uggs were in for a long time. They were really expensive. They capitalized on that demand, sold lots of them at a high price. And then now there are, the demand is not quite so high. This kind of leads into substitutes. If you're thinking about the UGG example, there are also now lots of knockoff brands, right? Knockoff brands that can do the same thing. So why would you pay $200 for a pair of brand new UGG boots when you could get a pair of sheepskin boots from the Moccasin brand that look almost identical and keep your feet just as warm and are just as comfortable, right? So substitutes are goods used in place of one another. If the price of the substitute falls, then people will buy the cheaper substitute, making demand fall for the original product. Earlier in class, I also talked to you guys about Lyft and Uber, right? If Uber is experiencing surge pricing, making the price very high to take an Uber, and you could get a much cheaper ride from Lyft, I don't really care how I get from A to B, as long as I get from A to B on time, and so why wouldn't I go with the cheaper option? Right? So again, this graph you would see shift over to the left, right? As demand would fall for the original product as people buy the substitute instead. So the demand curve would shift to the left. So changes in demand, complementary goods. Complementary goods are products that are generally bought and sold together. An example would be the Hunter rain boots that a lot of you guys wear, right? Complementary. If you buy the boots, often you also buy the sock, but you do have to buy them separately. So if the price of the complement decreases, then the same thing would happen, right? Then it would move from the first line, it would move over to the left. Okay. Another example, think about ingredients. If an ingredient is required and the price of, let's say, the price of milk goes up, and then the subsequent price of your Starbucks latte will also go up, right? And what's going to happen to demand if the price goes up? Demand will go down, right? What happens if the price goes down? Demand will go up. Okay, one big thing I want to make sure that everybody's very, very clear on is that there is a big difference between demand and quantity demanded. A change in demand is when is caused by something other than a change in the product's price. It causes the entire demand curve to shift to the left or the right. So those are the 5 factors that we just covered, right? 5 factors that we just covered. Changes in population, changes in income, changes in tastes and preferences, changes in substitutes, and changes in complementary goods. A change in a quantity demanded is caused by a change in the price of the good, and it is shown as a movement along the demand curve. So if you look over to the right at the graph here, if price decreases, the quantity demanded increases. Okay, so it's a shift along this line. If price increases, quantity demanded decreases. Okay, so if price increases, price goes up, quantity demanded decreases. If price goes down, quantity demanded increases. Okay, so this demand curve, you would kind of shift it along the line, right? But you would not shift the chart over. You would not shift the line over. Okay. All right, the next concept to cover is price elasticity of demand. Elasticity of demand measures how much the quantity demanded changes when price goes up or down, how much consumers respond to a given change in price. So an example of elastic demand is a rise or fall in price that greatly affects the amount people are willing to buy. Good examples of these are like luxury items or things that have many substitutes, right? So an elastic demand is a rise or fall in price that greatly affects the amount that people are willing to buy. So think about the brownie example, right? Brownies are kind of a nice luxury. So if brownies went up to $10, you just would go without brownies and you would be okay for that because the demand for the brownies would decrease and maybe you would go find your brownies elsewhere, right? Because the brownies here are really delicious, but maybe you could find a brownie somewhere else that was pretty comparable for a lot cheaper. Okay? An example of inelastic demand, this is a little different. When a price changes, it does not result in substantial change in the quantity demanded. So examples are things like necessary goods like salt or pepper and certain medicines. Another big example of this are things like housing, right? The rent prices in San Francisco are through the roof, totally crazy, but it's a necessity. People need to have somewhere to live, and so they're willing to pay whatever it takes as long as they have a good roof over their head. Okay, so that would be an example of inelastic demand. So think of inelastic demand as being necessary goods that no matter what the price, people will pay. And elastic demand is something where if the price goes up, people tend to not want to buy it. Okay, so price elasticity of demand depends on 3 main factors. Number 1, the existence of substitutes, right? Maybe I can find those brownies somewhere else for a lot cheaper. Or are these the only brownies in the whole world? And so if I want a brownie, I have to get them from school. Number 2, the percentage of a person's total budget devoted to the purchase of that good, right? We talked about the cost of gas, right? Gasoline. Do you need to get gasoline for your car? And if so, or could you carpool, right? Maybe if it's eating too much into your daily budget or your weekly budget, you could find a way around it, right? So it's a percentage of the person's total budget devoted to the purchase of that good. If the brownies cost $10 and I only have $100 a week, that's going to be a big percentage of my budget, right? So maybe I'm willing to go without. Number 3, the time consumers are given to adjust to a change in price. Is it a gradual thing where all of a sudden the price of brownies slowly creeps up over time? Or is it something where all of a sudden the price goes from $2 a brownie to $10 a brownie? Huge jump. Or is it a slowly, first they move to $2.25, then $2.50, then to $2.75, then to $3, and so on. All right, now it's your turn. So use the criteria to determine if the 4 written products are elastic or inelastic. So take a second to write them down. Pepper, housing, Coca-Cola, or Stila lip gloss. Use the criteria below. Make sure you tell me why. Pause the video if you need to. Okay, so pepper. Is that elastic or inelastic? Pepper is something that is inelastic. It's considered a necessity, right? You need it to enhance your food, although you may be willing to go without. What about housing? Housing is also something considered inelastic, right? You have to have housing. It's a necessity, so you're not willing to go without it. Coca-Cola, on the other hand, is different, right? Coca-Cola is something that's elastic. Although some of you might have your favorite brand, Coca-Cola is something that there does exist a pretty comparable substitute, Pepsi. So maybe you'd be willing to switch out Pepsi for Coca-Cola if Coca-Cola is not available. Or if the price of Coca-Cola went through the roof, maybe you would switch and start drinking Pepsi instead. Okay? And also, what about Stila lip gloss? What makes their lip gloss so much better than any other lip gloss? Or is there something that makes it so much better? What percentage of your budget is going towards a $25 or $30 lip gloss when you could get one at CVS for a quarter of the price? Or are there other substitutes that would be a better substitute for the cost? Okay, and that brings us to the close of our demand portion of the lecture. We will be talking about supply on Monday. Don't forget to do the worksheet, pages 1, 2, and 3, and you're going to bring it to class on Monday so that we can begin the supply portion with pages 4, 5, and 6. Looking forward to seeing you on Monday. Have a great weekend.